Okay, so in this video, we'll be looking at how to implement a rectangle class. This was the example I used in my prior video. We talked about the different attributes and methods that we could write for the rectangle class. So here we are going to see how to declare a class, and then we are going to look at different components like the constructor, and then we are going to look at some of the attributes for this particular class, and we are going to write one method. This is just so we can have some testable code. This is only an introduction, so we can like try things out. I have here say C++ OOP, that is the program name. So what we are going to do, I made sure that I added this using namespace std, and I added hello world rectangle here. Maybe we should say hello rectangle. So what we are going to do right now is like declare a class. So class, when you declare a class is the blueprint. It is the template. So we have to use the keyword class. Then we have to write the name of the class. So we could say rectangle, that's the name, and then followed by curly braces. So everything, like we talked about encapsulation, right? So everything that can that belongs to the class should be within these curly braces. At the end, let's put a semicolon. Okay, so the first thing we want to like check is that make sure that you have your keyword class, then this is the name, and then two curly braces and a semicolon. So this, I am writing all of this inside the main.cpp. I am not creating a new file, because when you create a new file, you have to create a header, and we will see about that after we get comfortable with classes. So for now, whatever class we write, we are going to be writing it inside main.cpp. So that makes life easier. We don't have any reference issues. Okay, so now we have a class called rectangle. So let us write an access modifier called private, an access modifier called public. So we are writing both. So we are going to look at what these two mean. Anything under private means that it is only accessible within the class. It is not even accessible to the objects of the class. Okay, so if I create a rectangle called R1 of size 2, 3, length is 2, width is 3, even that rectangle cannot access the private information, the private properties. Okay, you cannot access it through the objects, but you can access it through the methods inside this class. So that is what private means. So let us define some of the attributes. So integer length, and then we can say integer width. So these are going to be the two attributes for our rectangle. I made them private for a specific reason. So if you think about a rectangle, the main two attributes that a rectangle can have are going to be the length and the width. If that data is compromised, then that rectangle, the dimensions are useless to us if somebody can tamper with it. When I say rectangle, it seems silly, but if you think about a bank account or your social security database, those become really, really relevant. This starts making sense. So the idea is that anything that is really sacred or sensitive or that is important to the integrity of your class, you want to keep it as private and have your methods access those and modify those. So that is the idea. So we could also add a couple more called a string color, and then we could say so we could have something like that, and then we could say, so those are the private, some of the private attributes. Now we are going to define some public methods. So we could have a public attribute also. For example, if you don't care about the color being private, we could put it here. There is no problem. So for now, let's keep it like that. Let's say a length and width are going to be really important, and we don't want to compromise on that. But then color and border color, we could keep it as public. So what does this mean? This means that anything that is public is accessible through the objects and to anybody outside the class. Anything that is private is accessible only to that particular class. So from within the class, we can modify it. So the next thing that we are going to look at is called as a constructor. It is a special type of method. It shares the same name as that particular class. So we are going to say rectangle. It's a constructor. So this rectangle constructor is the one that is going to be responsible. Every time you ask for an object of type rectangle, this constructor gets called. Whether we define it or not, it will be offered to us by the compiler automatically to take care of memory allocation and stuff like that. And then the reverse of that, when this whole process is over, the reverse of that is called as a destructor that will get called to release all those memory. So in this particular example, rectangle, that is the name. The name has to match with the name of the class. So here I just want to do something. So I just want to maybe just print out what my length is. Normally we'll have something useful here. Here we are just saying the length to test it out. Now we have a constructor. We have attributes, we can call them as attributes here, and then we also call them as member variables. So they are variables, but they are attached to a class. And then we have a constructor. So let's see. So we have all of this. Let's run the code and see if there is any compile error. There is no compilation error, but our code was never executed. So we do not know if there could be any bug in our code because we never created an object. Without creating an object, there is no way we can invoke the class. So inside main, we have to create the object. The object is rectangle. The class name is rectangle. We want rectangle R1. Okay. Now I'm creating an object called rectangle R1. So let us see. R1 dot color. So I want to print R1 dot color. See out. R1 dot color. See out. R1 dot length. Let's see what happens. So I'm trying to access a private variable. I'm trying to access a public variable. Let's see what happens. Let's run this code. So we get an error saying length is a private member of rectangle. So it is saying please do not use it. So this is invalid. Even from the own object we cannot call length because it is private. So let's run the code with just the color. Okay, so just this code executed. Let's put a breakpoint. So if you go here to the debugger, the third option here on the left, click on that. It tells you how to set breakpoints. You could just go and touch one of this code here. So when we create the rectangle, if you just touch this as the blue point and run the code, it will come and wait there for you to step through the code. So you could watch what's going on. What's going on here? So I tried, let's see here. Okay, run the code. So hello rectangle got created, then rectangle R1 is called. When we call that, it's coming here into the constructor and waiting for us. So let's hover over length and then let's see. So here it is telling us what is inside, what are all getting called. You can see all of that here. So variables, color is string. I don't know why length is 8. Oh, is it 8 or 0? 8. Length is 8. Okay. So normally it's a bad practice to try and use a variable that does not have any value. This is really bad what I'm doing here. So I'm going to set it len equal to 0, width equal to 0, Okay, so uh, hold on one second. So what we saw here is we created a class, we created private members and public members inside it. We created one constructor that set the private variables to 0. So the point is, when we have a private member, okay, that sounds like pirate. Hold on one second. So length is private. Okay, so this is the rectangle class. It has this private length, private width. Okay, which means it is completely secure with nobody can access it. Okay, so we have rectangle class, and then we have R1, which is the child, which inherited from, which is the object, sorry, I apologize, which is the object. This is the object. R1 rectangle, right? So this is the class, this is the object. Even R1 does not have access to length and width. Who has access? Access is provided for the methods here. So rectangle constructor. Then if we have a display method, it will have access. So all these methods can have access to length. It has access. But if you try to access it both ways, okay, but if you try and access it from outside, like R1 does not have access to the private variables. Okay, so that's kind of like the point. So 1 second, I want to like show you the debugging one more time. So if you go into on the left side, if you can see where my cursor is on the left side, third one is debugger. This is new feature. So when the debugger comes, you can just go and touch any line, and then your execution of the code will stop right there. So basically, the constructor is a special type of method. So that's what we have here, constructor. The constructor can be used to initialize the member variables. It could be used to, like create some basic file handle or IO networking kind of operations. It could actually like be used to create another object of another class if it's a composition situation or aggregation situation. So there are so many ways the constructor can be used. When you use it to initialize some of the variables, it is called as the initialization constructor. Okay, so here when you call rectangle R1 with, we are not sending any value, it sets the values to 0. We could even make it so that it always sets it to some 2 or 1 maybe, because maybe that is the least amount that, for example, if this rectangle is a tile, maybe the tile will have some measurements that are valid. So that could be one of the reasons why we always set it. So we don't want bad data. So anytime somebody tries to create a rectangle, it's going to have a minimum length of 2. Okay, that's what's happening here. So here, so we tried printing out R1 color, there is nothing. So let's set the value of R1.color. Now if we say cout R1.color, so let's see what happens. So that is how we set the value. So the way it works is, doesn't matter when we say dot, when we use that period, all we are saying is this particular attribute belongs to this particular object. That's what we are trying to say. So we cannot access color directly. We have to say what object it belongs to before we access color, because normally the reason why we have class is because we are going to create multiple objects of that type. So we are going to have many rectangles. Okay, so let's create another rectangle, R2. Okay, maybe this is going to be a red rectangle. So here we have to say R2. Okay, for so far so good. Now what if I want to be able to say the dimensions of that rectangle, length and width, as soon as I try to create the constructor? How do I do that? Here, when I create, I want to be able to say something like 2, 4, like that. I want to give the length and the width right here. How do I do that if I want to do that? So what you do is we can create constructors that can accept parameters. So we could do this. Here we will just say we are going to send you length int width. Okay, instead of 2 here, we will say LW. Okay, so I'm going to take this out because just to keep it clean. Okay, if we don't give anything, the initial values are going to be 2, 2. But if we want to give some out input, then it should be acceptable also. Okay, so let's set a breakpoint right here. Again, run the code. Blue. What happened? Okay, here I should be setting R2.color, not R1.color. Okay, now blue and red. I want to actually stop the code here. Oh, look. I just set the breakpoint. So the one thing is, let me stop one more time. So if you see, if you use this guy here, it's gonna just run and not stop. So please use this one. If you are setting a breakpoint, just use this one. Okay, I'm gonna run the code. Okay, so see, L is going to be R2 there. So 2, 2. You can see that I made a mistake here, width 2 instead of width W. That's why I got 2, 2. So let's do this. You can see here the variables. So once they get some value, they are going to have the right value. So let's just step through one more time. So if you see here on the variables tag, R2 is going to have 2, 2. But this is a bug. I have to make this into W. So I don't think we need all these breakpoints now. I'm going to be clearing them all, and then maybe I'll just have a breakpoint here so I can hover over and watch what's going on. Okay, let's run from here on the left. You have to run the debugger only if you want to debug. If you are not planning on debugging, you can just run from the green play button. Okay, so now the code executed. I want to just see the values 2 and 4. So you can see that you can have a constructor that takes no parameters. You can have a constructor that takes parameters. So you could just set some value or do some processing based upon this data. So this is how you use constructor with parameters. This is how you use a constructor with no parameters. Okay, and then we saw then the code got executed. It's all good now. So we saw the special type of method that is constructor. It has no return value, so there's nothing in the front. You just directly say the name. The name has to match the name of the class. Normally constructors have to be like public, and then we saw how to use them. So what we are going to do is we are going to write a display method. So we are going to write a method. It is a method. A method is just a function. So we are going to say void display. So this display method is just going to return the private values that we have. So it is going to say cout rectangle. So we are just going to say rectangle dimensions. Okay, so we wrote a display method now. Let's see how this works. So any method you have to call similar to your members. So you have to say r1.display. Because this is a method, you have to use the method notation. So when you copy paste, be sure that you're using the right object, r1 and r2.display. Okay. Now let's run this code and see what happens. So there is an unnecessary breakpoint here. We'll clear that. So you can see rectangle dimensions are 2, 2 and 2, 4. Okay, so you can see here in this place, display has access to length and width. You can see this guy has display rectangle. This guy has access to, oopsie, these two, and display has access to these two. Nobody else can access because they are private. Okay, so R1 directly cannot access length and width. R1 has to call rectangle and rectangle will call length. R1 has to call display. So this is for setting, this is for getting. So there is this extra layer of protection for our data. Okay, that is the advantage of using the private keyword. Okay, so going back to our code, we just saw how to write a new class. We just saw what private and public means. You could have private methods, you could have private attributes, you could have public methods and public attributes. So if you say private, you can only work with it inside the class. Even the object cannot access it. If it's public, anyone can access it. So we also saw about constructor. Constructor should have the same name as the class name. And then a constructor can be written with no parameters or many parameters. It's up to us. If a constructor is used to initialize values, it is called as initialization constructor, which is what we have done here. And then we also created a method. You can see that a class will not get invoked unless you create an object for that class. I've seen students submit work where they've done all this hard work from line 4 through line 31, but they would not have done anything inside the main method where you actually create the object. So remember, it's a two-step process. You create the class first, then you create the object of that class so you can test how your code is. Without that, if you just run the code, it's not going to give you any errors other than any of the typo errors, but any runtime errors will not be visible till you invoke a class using an object of that type. So I think this is a good introduction. I'm going to stop the content for this week at this point. So next week when we come in, we'll go a little deeper into our methods, look at other types of constructors, and also we'll look at like getters and setters. Okay, thank you.